Today's scripture reading comes from the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated at the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life. Those who conquer will inherit these things, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. If nothing else attaches to you from my sermon this morning, I want you to get at least this one shred of biblical knowledge. The passage we just heard did not come from the book of Revelations. This may seem like a small detail, but there's no S on the end of Revelation. I'm sparing you from a moment of embarrassment when someone says to you, "Didn't your pastor ever teach you that?" Now, there may be other reasons you're embarrassed by what your pastor has done or not done, but this is not going to be one of them. Now, it may seem like a minor detail, but the real name of the book is the Revelation to John, and it's also permissible to call it the book of Revelation. Okay? You are now among the select few who understand this. And thinking in those terms as the chosen ones who have special inside wisdom is the best way to approach this book. For you see, John was writing a book with coded language in it. He has symbols and images that the first followers of Jesus would understand, but outsiders wouldn't. Its poetic imagery may sound as if it's written by someone who's under the influence of an hallucinogenic drug. But don't be fooled. The author is doing a couple of things. For one, he's writing a document that he hopes will slip under the radar of the Roman censors. And secondly, he is hoping to engage the reader's imagination. So, he's trying to communicate in visions. He had visions that he experienced, and he's trying to communicate this to people through images. He's trying to talk to those people who are being persecuted for their faith. He's telling them it's time to hang on, to remain faithful until the very end, because a glorious afterlife awaits you. Now, John was exiled on the tiny island of Patmos. This is an island out in the Aegean Sea, about 40 miles west of the coast of Turkey. Camilla and I got to go there and experience the Orthodox Easter a few years ago. Orthodox Easter falls a week after ours, So we were there on the island, and there are several little congregations there, and we got to go to the cave where John was in exile by the Romans. Now, he was in exile there, and he was in this cave that's pretty large space, and now it's been converted to a sanctuary. So when they celebrated Easter, the way they do it in Greece is the Easter services start a little before midnight on Saturday night, so that they stretch into Easter morning, and you're there at the first crack of the clock striking midnight, and you're into Easter Sunday, and all these celebrations are going on. So we attended a few of these little congregations, and about 1:30 in the morning, we were in the cave. And we're in there worshiping, and it's a pretty good sized space inside there, but it's a really, really low ceiling. Fortunately, most Greeks are under 6 feet tall. I left a portion of my scalp on the roof of the cave. Now, most scholars believe that John composed the Revelation close to the end of the first century, sometime in the 90s, when Domitian was the Roman emperor, and he was persecuting Christians for their faith. Today, when we attempt to read this book, it's really important, if we're going to interpret it, for us to block our tendency to read things as if they are facts, concrete facts, or as if it's some historical account of what took place. That's not the way this book is written. It doesn't present one concrete fact after another. Instead, it presents dramatic images and frightening figures and symbolic numbers. It's unlike any other book in the Bible except the Old Testament book of Daniel. Now, to understand this book, it's best to approach it as if it were a book of poems or impressionist paintings. We need to turn down that portion of our brain that's searching for concrete facts, and we need to turn up that portion of our brain that triggers our imagination. To help us, it would probably be best if we turned off the lights. And if we added some mysterious music. And to really do it right, I should probably walk through with a censer filled with incense burning, and all the smoke would be going, this fragrance would be filling the sanctuary. And then the smoke alarms would go off and you'd get up and run out. So we're not going to do that part. Today's passage comes near the end of the book of Revelation, but a quick scan of the earlier verses will give us a flavor for how John communicates these visions that he's had. In the first chapter, John begins to make his initial brush strokes on the canvas. Let your imagination picture what he gleaned from one of the visions he experienced. I, John, who shares with you in Jesus the suffering and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on the island of Patmos. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. That voice was saying, "Write what you see and send it to the 7 churches." Then I turned to see whose voice it was, and when I did, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and I saw one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash across his front. His head and his hair were white as white wool, white as snow. His eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined as if in a furnace. And his voice was like many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. And his face was like the sun shining with full force. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as if I were dead. But then the one placed his right hand on me and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first. I am the living one. I was dead, but now I am alive forever and ever. At another point in the letter or the revelation to John, John tells of being in the Spirit and being swept up into heaven. He sees a throne, and the one seated on the throne looks like jasper and carnelian. And around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on each of the thrones are 24 elders. Coming from the thrones are flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder. And in front of the throne there are 7 flaming torches. These are the 7 spirits of God. And in front of the throne is something like a glass sea, something like crystal. Are you picturing all of this? It's pretty wild. Around the throne and each side of the throne are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in the front and eyes in the back. The first living creature is like a lion. The second one is like an ox. The third creature has a human face. The fourth creature is like an eagle. John envisions the one seated on the throne holding a scroll that has been sealed with 7 seals. But there's great weeping because no one can break the seals. And then Jesus comes. And when Jesus comes, he is able to break the seals. He breaks the first seal, and out comes a white horse with a rider on it. He breaks the second seal, and a bright red horse gallops out with a rider on it. He breaks the third seal. It's a black horse, again with a rider. And the fourth seal, a green horse, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In his numerous visions, John sees earthquakes. He sees the sun turning black. He sees the moon turn blood red. He sees stars fall from the sky. He tells of seeing people in heaven, and he says it is such a great multitude that it is more than anyone could ever count. Eventually, we reach the 21st chapter and today's reading, where John says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. And God was dwelling with God's people. And God was wiping away the tears, because there would be no more crying, because death would be no more." Now, some people have tried to take the book of Revelation very literally and tried to figure out exactly what heaven looks like. It's important to keep in mind that the author is attempting to describe for us the indescribable. He's trying to provide a picture of infinity for finite creatures. He's trying to provide a glimpse of a purely spiritual realm for creatures who are just focused on a material world. So he leaves us with these evocative images, not digital photographs. His description is not enough to give us the assurance that we know just what heaven is like. And for that, I suspect there are going to be some real surprises when we get there. A clergy friend of mine, Nora Tubbs Tisdale, spent her life in the ministry. She just retired in May, and she retired after this very successful ministry as the homiletics professor at Yale Divinity School. She told this story about her maternal grandfather. Her grandfather was a minister, a Presbyterian minister throughout his life, and he died at the ripe old age of 98. She loved her grandfather. She appreciated his intellect and his commitment and his faith. But she said they regularly disagreed on social issues and political issues and church issues. And one of the issues they disagreed on was that he didn't think women should be ordained in the ministry. And you can imagine how that hurt her. And she hoped that before he died, he would change his mind on that, but he never did. He happened to die on World Communion Sunday, and they got a phone call early that morning. Nora's husband is also a Presbyterian minister, and they got the call before heading to church. And Nora was visibly upset. She was in a chair at the dining room table, and she was weeping. And her husband came in and injected a little joy into the moment. He said, "Let's think about your grandfather. World Communion Sunday. He is at the great banquet table in heaven, experiencing the meal that he's always thought about. And who do you think's serving him? I'll bet it's some women clergy." I suspect all of us are going to be in for a few surprises. So on this All Saints Sunday, we remember those who touched our lives deeply, who nurtured our faith, and who now live eternally with God. On the one hand, it is a solemn day because we no longer have the opportunity to hear their unique voice again. We no longer can peer into their eyes. We no longer can feel their warm embrace. So there may be some tears. But mingled in with our tears are also feelings of joy. Joy for the blessing they were to us. Joy for the deep love we shared with them. And joy for the hope that we share of seeing them once again in God's eternal realm.